right, up at the top of your next available page, you are going to write comma rules. And you are going to take this sheet, the hard and fast rules for commas, cut it out all the way around the outside. And we actually don't need this bottom empty box here, so you can ignore that and just cut at the bottom of rule number 9. And that way it'll fit better on your page. And then just glue the whole back side down when you're done. Okay, and then I'm just going to glue it in. All right, let's start filling out some of these rules here. So we have 9 different rules for commas, and I'm just going to zoom in on the examples here. Again, we're just going to write examples across the whole empty space. We're going to ignore this column here. Okay, so the first rule says, do use a comma to separate 3 or more items or elements in a series. So I ate pizza, chips, and ice cream. Okay, you can also have different actions listed in this too that might be longer than just one word in each. And again, this is where our Oxford comma comes into play. This is our optional one, the one that people still argue over to this day whether it's needed or not. All right, rule number 2, do use a comma between 2 adjectives only when the word and could be inserted in its place. Jason is a handsome, charming boy. What I'm going to do is write it underneath. Jason is a handsome and charming boy. If you can insert and in between 2 adjectives describing a noun, you separate those 2 adjectives with a comma. Number 3, do use a comma before and after a word or phrase that renames the noun. So it's kind of like extra information thrown into a sentence that's not needed, but just adds detail. And you'll see in a second here. George, my oldest brother, has red hair. Now, my oldest brother is this what we call an appositive. So it's extra information describing the noun thrown in there. And the glue in order to insert it into the sentence is a comma surrounding each side. You could get rid of it and ignore it and just say George has red hair and the sentence still makes sense. But we're just adding in extra detail to that sentence, renaming the noun or redescribing the noun. So we need to separate it by commas. Number 4, do use a comma when a sentence begins with an introductory word or phrase, such as well, yes, therefore, for example, or on the other hand. And there's tons of other ones too, but these are just the most common ones over here. So we'll say yes, comma, you can stay up an extra hour. Another one, however, you must still wake up on time. So if you have one of these introductory words, put a comma right after it to put it into the sentence. All right, I'm going to move down. Rule number 5 says, do use a comma before and after a word used as an interrupter in the middle of a sentence. So now it's the same concept as the rule above. It's just not at the beginning. It's in the middle of a sentence. So let's see. The dog, comma, however, comma, still needs to be taken outside. Now, that's extra information. It's not needed. You could still get rid of it in the sentence. The dog still needs to be taken outside, and the sentence will still make sense. but it's just adding more like drama or dramatic effect to the sentence. So the dog, however, still needs to be taken outside. If you're adding one of those in there, surround it by commas. Rule number 6, do use a comma between a city and a state and after the state if the sentence continues. I was born in Wisconsin, Dells, comma, Wisconsin, comma, more than 25 years ago. So comma in between the city and the state, and then a comma after the state if the sentence is still continuing. And we always spell out the full city and state. I know sometimes you can abbreviate them. We always spell them out if they're in a sentence. Number 7, do use a comma to separate the day of the month from the year and after the year if the sentence is still continuing again. So we could do, I was born on September 30th, comma, 1992, comma, in Wisconsin Dells. Okay, so comma in between the date, the number date of the month, and then the year, and then after the year if the sentence is still continuing, very similar to this here. Rule number 8, do use a comma when a sentence begins with a prepositional phrase, adverbial clause, or dependent clause. So these are parts of a sentence that are at the beginning that can't be a sentence on their own. And we know dependent clauses are fragments. They're not sentences on their own. They need another part of a sentence in order to be a complete sentence, or an independent clause and a dependent clause need to be attached together. So if you have a dependent clause, which are these same things also, just different ways to name it, at the beginning of your sentence, put a comma after your dependent clause. Under the bridge, comma, this is your dependent clause, the fog made it difficult to see. Okay, so under the bridge, if I were to cover the rest of that up, that's not a sentence on its own. Under the bridge. If you remember, you'd be asking me the question if I came up to you in the middle of the hallway and said that to you. You'd say, so what? Under the bridge. If that's thrown at the beginning of a sentence, you need to separate it with a comma or join it with a comma to connect it to the rest of the sentence. Last rule, rule number 9, do use a comma to interrupt direct quotations or before and after a direct quotation. Okay, so I kind of hinted at this yesterday in class, or Tuesday in class. I'm going to do quotations here and say, why, comma, quotations, I asked, comma, quotations, must you leave? Question mark quotations. So this is what I was talking about on Tuesday. You may see part of or start of a quotation not capitalized, and that would be if it's interrupted like this. If you have a quotation, you always have that comma right before the end of the quotation, unless you have a question mark or an exclamation point there, exclamation point there. Always have it a comma, and then this is the said statement of a quote. And instead of being at the beginning or the end, they threw it into the middle. So when you throw it into the middle, you need to have that comma after it to continue your quote after that. Now I'll just do another quote here. Right, comma, I forgot. Comma, quotations, I laughed and said. Okay, so we have our comma separating the end of our quote with our said statement here. So that's that little part at the end, could be long, but that part at the end that's saying who said it or what was being said, who was saying it, that kind of a thing. Okay, now we have another section here. Hard and fast rules, practice for commas. We're going to cut this out all the way around the outside, glue the whole backside down to the next available page, just like we did on Tuesday with our capitalization. And this you're probably going to want a different color pen, pencil, marker to write with, just because commas are so small to see sometimes. They're hard to tell when you add them in with a pen or a pencil. So I'm going to glue this into my page here, right next to my rules. And then I'm going to label this page commas practice. Okay, so I'm going to take a highlighter or a marker and add in my commas that way so you guys can see it a little bit better. Okay, so during World War II, the U.S. and allies fought against Germany, Italy, and Japan. So we actually have an introductory phrase here. During World War II, comma, the U.S. and allies fought against Germany. Now we have a list. Germany, comma, Italy, this would be our optional comma, and Japan. Rule number 2, or practice number 2. Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, was one of Europe's greatest enemies. Okay, so we have another, not introductory, but an interrupter or an appositive, which is extra information talking about the noun. So we're going to add in a comma here and a comma here. The leader of Nazi Germany. You could get rid of that in the sentence. Adolf Hitler was one of Europe's greatest enemies, and the sentence still makes sense. But this is just kind of redescribing the noun that they're talking about in the sentence. All right, number 3. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked a naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I see a date and a city and a state. So we have a comma after the number or the day of the week or the number of the month, and also after the year because our sentence is continuing. We also have one in between our city and our state. All right, next one. President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." We have a comma right after said because it's starting a quotation. And that's actually the only one we're adding in this case. Number 5. World War II became a treacherous, bloody battle. We only have one in between the two adjectives that are describing battle. And number 6. However, peace was restored in Europe and in the Pacific. Now, I kind of naturally paused there without really realizing it, so I kind of gave that one away. We have an introductory word at the beginning of our sentence, so we need to have a comma right after that. All right, zoom out really quick on our practice problems, and I guess I forgot to zoom out on the example, so I'll do that really quick. If you need to, go ahead and pause it. And then what we're going to do is actually flip open to a third page. And up at the top, you're going to write purposes for commas. Okay, now you have a little sheet that looks like this, purposes for commas. I'm just going to trim it up a little bit so it fits better on my page. I know everyone's is kind of a different size depending on how I cut it out for you. So go ahead, if you want to trim it. Otherwise, just cut it out all the way around the outside, however you're trimming it, and then glue the whole backside down. You're probably going to have to glue it in vertically so that we have enough room. Okay, now purposes for commas. So we're going to fill in the purpose column down here. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. Okay, so there's different purposes for commas, like we kind of picked up on in the last few pages here. So this first sentence says, I enjoy playing basketball, comma, softball, comma, and volleyball. So I'm actually just going to go over these commas a little bit so you can see them better and where they are. The purposes for these commas, or the commas in this first example, is just to list 3 or more things. So when you have a list of 3 plus things, or 3 or more things, you need to separate them with commas. All right, second one, I enjoy grape soda, comma, but my sister does not. Now this is going all the way back to the beginning of the year. You have a comma right in the middle, and I see one of these magical words right here. This is a fanboys. So we have a compound sentence here, and that's the purpose of this. Because you're combining one simple sentence with another or independent clause with a dependent clause, and you're attaching it with that fanboys, or that coordinating conjunction. You could ignore that and have, I enjoy grape soda, period. My sister does not, period. And those are two simple sentences on their own. But if you want to make them one, you can combine them with a comma and a fan voice, and that's what a compound sentence is. The next one says, however, comma, I do like orange soda. This would be an introductory word. That would be the purpose for this one. Next one, we lost the game, comma, even though we played our heart out. The comma here is attaching a dependent clause to an independent clause. So we have the independent clause here. You could stop. We lost the game could be a sentence on its own. If I were to cover up, even though we played our heart out, or cover up the first part and leave this isn't a sentence on our own. We can't make sense of this. If I came up to you in the middle of the hallway and said, even though we played our heart out, and I walked away, you would say, so what? Okay? So this is the dependent clause attaching the independent clause. Brett said, comma, quotations, I was happy with the way we played. This would be for a quotation. Next one says, Hannah, how have you been lately? Comma's right here. This is actually for direct address because you're talking to that person. Directly addressing a certain person, you need to separate it with a comma right at the beginning. The next one, Reedsburg, comma, Wisconsin. That's a city, state. So I'm going to do city/state. You need to have a comma in between the two when you're writing them. And the last one, March 12th, comma, 2018. That would be for the date. We always put a comma after our day of the month and right before our year. All right, that is it. So look on the directions for this assignment for the rest of your assignment attached after this.